All right, here we are in part two of this project with the R80 RT conversion, and let's start taking it apart. First thing we'll do is take the seat off. And this is best to get up underneath. It's a couple of 10mm wrench-sized nuts you need to take off and bolts, and take the hinges off from beneath. Now with the rear hinge removed, now I can get this front hinge off of here. There we go. So that's the way the Corbin seat is attached. You'll see how it is at the end when we put the stock seat back on. Similar but different. Okay, I'm going to take the side covers off and have a look at those. There's a Phillips screw underneath that you just need to loosen, not completely remove. And then comes out hooked in two places, and the screw holds it on the bottom. So this one's broken and it's been repaired with fiberglass. And so we're gonna see what we can do to get a new one of these before we send it out for the paint. But next I'm gonna take the tank off. Now just gonna make sure the fuel's off and remove the fuel lines. And then there's a couple of little clips in here that need to be removed. And that's what holds the tank in place. Now on a lot of these Monolever models, you'll find a brace that looks just like this, and it's located underneath the tank, and it's bolted on with two M6 hex bolts, and it connects the left and right sides of the tank together. And I think it's for safety reasons, in case of an accident, that the tank doesn't eject off the motorcycle. A lot of times these are missing. They were taken off at some point during service and never reinstalled. Pretty common, but there's probably a bunch of them still has it. So if the tank doesn't come off easily, like this one just did, and something else is holding you up, then look for that bracket. That'll be underneath. Okay, so now that the tank's off, we can really see what's going on here. We've got, as you can see, all the electrics are on the right-hand side. That's why that tank's a little bit smaller, like I was talking about earlier. And that's all fine. Everything's very centrally located here. Now, one thing we're going to have to change is the way the brakes are laid out, because it's got the upper brake hose goes into this fitting, and then these steel lines go down through into the fairing, and then rubber from that point on, or stainless steel. So there's a couple of ways we can go about doing this. When the time comes, we can just run lines straight from the splitter down to the calipers, or we can run one line down to one caliper and cross over to the other. So there's a couple of different ways to deal with that. But now we can actually start to see what's going on here. So removing the fairing is going to be the next stage. So when we got this bike originally, the lower fairing pieces had already been removed, but we were supplied with them, which is pretty cool. So normally the first thing you would do here in removal of the fairing is take the lowers off. So fairly easy to do. The front is held in place with these 8 or 9 screws or other, and then the lowers are attached to that centerpiece, and some screws are accessible from the top through these compartments. And then at the bottom there was a bracket that went to the engine mount stud, and then there were 2 screws on there. Sometimes these things would rattle. For whatever reason, they were removed, perhaps to cool things down a little bit. But in any case, they're identical to the lower fairing parts of an RS too. They're the same part. And so that would be a fairly easy thing to remove if we had to do it. And that would be the first step to remove those lower fairing parts. Oh, moving right along here. All right, first I'm going to take this off. The way you do that is you have to peel back the rubber here and then get a screwdriver into this little Phillips screw right on the corner and remove that screw. The screw can kind of like just stay in there. It's no big deal. Do the same thing with the other 3 corners. And that's it. Comes right out like so. And now with that gone, you can you'll be able to see where you can remove the lower two screws, and you can also see the upper two screws at the main fairing bracket attachment points. But in order to make a smooth removal, I want to remove all of the electrical components, the lights, etc., so that nothing's like jammed up when I'm trying to take the fairing off. So just starting with the parking light. Remove the boot and just unplug the wires. Same thing here. Okay, before I get too crazy with taking electrical components apart, I'm going to disconnect the battery. Just be safe. Take the negative cable off so we don't fry anything. Okie doke. So now the next thing is going to be to take the gauges out of the fairing. However, it's a whole lot easier to get to them when the main instruments are out too. It's just easier to get up inside. Since they have to come off anyway, now's a good time to do that. So we'll take the dash pad off first. And so there's a little screw that you need to loosen just in front of that. So you can just kind of sneak a screwdriver in there and loosen these little Phillips screws. They don't need to be removed all the way. Just loosen them and then the dash pad comes off like so. So this is going to be an issue that we're going to deal with further on down the road when we put lower bars on there. You see these brackets are there just to hold this dash pad in place. And the dash pad sticks up pretty far. And you can still use it with lower bars, but I've got some other tricks that I think we'll get into on this later on. But that's the first step to do. The first step is to remove this part. And now we can see what's going on with these instruments. There's these three fasteners here that we'll need to loosen, and the speedo cable comes off. First thing I'll do is just take the speedo cable off. It's pretty tight, so a little bit of help with the pliers. It comes off just like so. And you just loosen these three bolts just a little bit, and that lifts right off. You flip that around, and normally there's a little screw here, but that's missing. So let's see if we just pull the plug out, just sort of rock the plug out. There we go, like so. Oh, the screw's there, but it was just jammed in there too far. Okay. So that's off now. And now it's just so much easier to get up behind there to remove these instruments. There's a couple little thumb screws. Let's start with the voltmeter. So there's bracket and the two thumb screws, and then the voltmeter will just push right straight back out, and then you can unplug the wires, the bulb. There we go. And then just I usually put the bracket back on just to keep everything tidy in one place. We'll be needing that. Okay, and then we'll take the clock out the same way pretty much. Okay. All right, so there's the clock. All righty, the next thing is to take the ignition switch out, and if the nut's too tight to loosen with your hands, you can sometimes get a pair of needle nose pliers to fit in there if they're pointy enough, like so, or some snap ring pliers work fantastic. You can just kind of straddle that like so and loosen the nut. Works great. For what we're doing, it's perfectly okay to just leave the ignition switch hooked up for right now. That way it all stays together. see all this, it's all in one wiring harness. It goes all the way down here to one gang plug. And by depressing the little locks on the side, you can disconnect it and take the whole thing out. And there we have it, pretty much the entire fairing wiring harness for this bike. We're going to be modifying this heavily later, but it's nice to get that out of the way. So moving right along now, I'll just remove these pocket covers from the fairing. And then you look down inside and you'll find that there is an M6 bolt going through the fairing, attaching it to this bracket. This one's missing, but there's one on this side, so we'll take that out. Go right down inside the fairing, and then there's a nut on the bottom. Need to hold that. And that comes out. All right, so now that the rear mount is loose, the next thing we need to do is take the center plastic part out around the forks. That's just going to be a screwdriver for that. Okay, so now I've got all the fasteners out. Now these boots are usually super glued in place. But if you just pull at them, hopefully they come off. This one's coming off pretty nicely. There we go. The other thing that's going to hang you up is the brake line, so you want to just sort of lift those out of the plastic. There we go. And then that part comes out like so. And by the way, if you ever are reassembling an RT or an RS or replacing these boots, what the right thing to do is to install the boot so that it really snaps in nice. If you have to clean this area up around here, then do that and get the boot in so that it fits nicely all around this little raised edge. And then lift up and put a little bit of super glue right in here on the sides here and on the top here, basically in these 4 areas. And that'll keep it in place, and it'll make it pretty easy to remove, like these were easy to remove if you ever need to again. Okay, just kind of looking things over now to see if there's anything else that I might have overlooked. I've just got these 4 fairing bolts, but there is an accessory outlet that was added here. So I'll just go ahead and get rid of that too. Otherwise, I think we're going to be good to go. So now these upper mounts are a little bit blind working, but it's not hard. You have to just use a short 10mm wrench and find that up there and just start to unscrew that bolt. Same on the other side. It's not really necessary to completely remove the bolts, just get them pretty loose on there, and because the brackets are slotted. And now the other front 2 are fairly easy to get to through the headlight opening. Here again, you don't really have to remove them all the way. Just get them loose a couple of turns. All right, it should be enough. Let's see what happens. We're going to take this from the front, and then we have to, at the same time, unhook it at the top. Kind just like so. Roll it back in that direction, and then it comes off fairly easily. Now you can see very clearly the 6 points at which the fairing was attached. Two at the top here, these two, as well as here down below. That's how the fairing's attached. Okay, no one said this was going to be easy. This is where things start to get a little bit complicated in terms of just determining a path forward. So here, we'll tell what I mean. So on these, first of all, we're going to do, just have the whole scope of things, is we're going to install this Siebenrock S fairing. Now this fairing is shaped just like the original BMW S fairing. However, it's a little bit taller in this area here, so it gives you a little bit more flexibility with which handlebars. It gives you the ability to run a little taller bar if you want to. It's a very, very nice part. So that's going to get painted. So having said that, that needs to be mounted. Now, there's also this complete kit here that we offer. All the bolts necessary to mount the S fairing, the top brackets, all the parts necessary. So that takes a lot of the guesswork out of it by getting this complete kit. So what that means is we're going to have to put on some different turn signals. These turn signal holders are going to be placed in there when we reassemble the forks, after we go through the forks. And then beyond that, we'll be needing to put some headlight ears in here to hold the headlight. Now we can reuse this headlight, no problem. The headlight's fine. We'll just be using, putting headlight ears on here. These are just a couple used ones I grabbed. Now, this is where it gets kind of weird, is with the ignition switch. Because if you use the ignition switch that came off of that, the cylinder, then you'll need a headlight ear that has a big opening on the left-hand side, or there's one way to do it, and that the ignition switch gets pushed through there. That's how they did it on the R90S, R100S, and all that. It was basically, the ignition would be on the left side of the headlight mount. However, this is a monolever headlight, and it doesn't have the big hole. It has basically just a threaded M8. So you're faced with a couple of different options here. Option one is, like I said, to get hold of, plenty to find on the used market probably, a headlight ear with a large opening, and locate the ignition switch into the headlight. But for that, you're going to need to also find a different headlight bucket. If you want to retain the headlight bucket that is on the bike, then you can use this monolever style headlight ear, which you see just has a slit in it to mount the headlight onto it. But now what about the ignition switch? Instead of using the ignition switch that came out, you could get a used ignition switch, because they're no longer available, from, like, say, a R80 or from a K75, K100. They're out there. And you could take the dash pad that came off the motorcycle and remove the BMW emblem, and it's designed so that the ignition switch fits right in there. It snaps right in. You need to get the other different type of ignition switch, though, but it can be wired in. It's no big deal. And that's a pretty slick way to do it, because that way you can put that right in front of you and retain the original headlight bucket, and then you're just doing that. So that's what I'm going to do here, except we're going to take it one step further. And what I really like are these K75 handlebars. They're kind of tough to find. We don't really have a lot of these around, but they're out there. So this is a really neat bend. It's a very comfortable bend. I really like it. The width is nice. It's really going to be a great fit for this bike. And then what's really cool is this K75 dash pad, like so. And it's missing the switch covers. But here again, that same ignition switch hole that we just looked at on the original dash pad is here. So that's a pretty slick setup. You get the ignition switch and really nice, clean looking dash panel with this K75 or K100 setup. Now all I got to do is find one of those ignition switches, but I'm pretty confident that I'll find one by the time I need it. So keep moving along. That's basically what we're going to use, what's the parts we're going to use. And it's important then at a certain point in time to kind of figure out what parts you're going to need to make the project go kind of smoothly. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and just remove this headlight, and then we'll go on to see what else we wind up doing on this bike. Okay, we'll take the headlight lens out, so like so, and you see there's really not much in here at all. There's just connection for the headlight at this point. And then it's easy enough to just press this grommet out and the plug pulls through. Now it's completely empty. We can just remove it. Watch out for the little rubber washer that's on the inboard side. Okay. There we go. Okay, so with that out of the way, now we can access the two bolts that hold this bracket into the steering head. Okay, so we won't be needing this part anymore. Okay, then while we're at it, might as well get rid of this bracket as well. 6mm Allen. You can remove this bracket from the frame. That's what that looks like. And that's what that looks like. This is the same part on the RS also. So now you can get a pretty good look at that, these brake lines I talked about earlier. See, that we're gonna have to change that one way or the other. This is totally designed for the RT or the RS fairing, and the setup needs to be changed. We'll get into that in a bit. So next thing is how the steering head bearings. These are like really notchy. Look at that. If I just run it into the middle position, it just snaps into place. Like there's such a huge detent in there. Think, look at that. So these are just definitely need to be replaced. So that'll be the next thing we'll do. Take the front end apart and dig into that, and I'll get the front end sorted out, and then we'll move on to the rear end, get that sorted out, and then attack the middle engine, gearbox, all that good stuff. So let's get started. Okay, first thing I'm going to do now is bleed out or remove all the brake fluid from the brake system, or as much as I can anyway, because we're going to change all this, and so we don't have brake fluid flying everywhere when we take things apart. Just going to try to get rid of it. So I'll just pop the cap off here. And one of these vacuum bleeders is pretty darn cool for doing something like this. If you have one of those, just need to have an air compressor. There we go. Going to first just remove the cap off of the master cylinder. Okay, just gonna crack this loose now with an 11mm wrench. And just apply a vacuum. Just to get things rolling, maybe give it a little push here. Yeah, it's sucking that out real nice. Kind of see, this was empty fluid in there. Cool. Gonna go over to the other side. That should be most, if not all, of the brake fluid that was in the system. Take these calipers off first. Leave them loose for now. I'm going to just go ahead and disconnect these brake lines here. Take that all off at once. Okay, for this is a 14 and an 11mm, and if you just kind of position the two wrenches like so, approximately like that, and just squeeze them together, that's brake this loose, real easy. So we have a little bit of a drip here, but that'll eventually subside. Just put a rag around like so, catch anything for right now. There we go. Just going to go ahead and remove this rear fender mounting bolt right now to get the bracket out of the way. There's one caliper. When we go to put this back together, we'll go through these calipers and also replace the pads and all that. But for right now, I'm just going to lay them aside because we'll get back to them later. Okay, next one. Okay, now I want to have a look at the brake discs. And they've got some pretty decent wear. You can really feel it. There's a pretty pronounced edge here. The brakes are pretty worn. Now, the brake discs themselves are labeled with the minimum thickness, and interestingly enough, it's in inches. It's 0.14 inches, presumably because it's a DOT standard that they have it right on there. And that works out to about 3.55 millimeters. And so I've got my trusty micrometer here, and I'm seeing that I'm getting about 3.8-ish throughout the board. So it's not hit minimum yet. So they could theoretically could go another set of pads. You know, you can kind of see the wear. They're still serviceable, technically speaking. We're going to replace them, I believe, because we're doing all this other stuff too. But it's always a good idea to keep an eye on the thickness of your brake rotors, and then look both sides for any real rough spots where it might have gone metal to metal. But these look like they're just honest 80,000 miles worth of wear. Okay, moving right along, we're going to get this front wheel off of here. First loosening this axle bolt. Pinch bolts next. Right, and now we'll just get this axle out of here. All right, there's that. And these tires aren't too bad, but we'll see what we want to do with those. They look like they're in pretty decent shape. Not my favorite profile, really. So as we talked about a moment ago, I'm going to go ahead and change out the brake disc, and I'm also going to replace the front wheel bearings on the bike as well. But I'll get back to that in a minute. Let's keep going on these forks and come back to the front wheel in just a little bit. Okay, the first order of business here is going to be to drain the fork tubes. And I'm doing this now with the front wheel off because it's just like a whole lot easier. You could of course do it fully assemble if you're doing a fork fluid change, but off the bike or with the wheel off is just easier. So we're going to need something to catch the oil in. And the first thing you want to definitely do always is loosen the filler plugs on the top because you want it to vent, otherwise it'll just dribble out. So that's the first thing. Pop the cap off. There's a couple of different versions of the front fork. This is a real early version, and it's basically an 8mm Allen. Later on, that's a different fastener. We'll be getting into that discussion a little bit later as well, but just want to remove the filler plug. Okay, and then we can take the plug out of the back of the fork slider. All right, I'll let that kind of drip for a bit before proceeding. I'm going to use new aluminum crush washers on these little bolts here. These are M6. You want to just tighten them until it seats, and then ever so a little bit more, just to put a little bit of crush in there. Don't over tighten them. Very easy to strip these. Just run it all the way down and give it another slight amount so you just feel it crush. And that's it. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and keep going, removing this front fender. Get rid of this oil first so I don't spill it and make a mess. Okay, we're just going to give this a little squeeze, and then it comes right out. Oh, there's a nice little butterfly there. Yeah, so that's pretty much all there is for the front fender. And the only other piece we need to remove now is the rear tail section, and then we can get all these parts off to the painter and get that part of it happening. So, well, let's keep going with this fork disassembly. So very cool part of the Monolever models is this integrated fork brace. I think that's really pretty cool. And you could remove the whole thing in its entirety, but I'm going to go ahead and take it apart so that I can properly clean everything and align everything when it goes back together again. Okay, so for right now, I just am loosening these bolts, not completely removing them, because I don't want the forks to spin when I go ahead and take the next fastener out. That holds them in place. But also having that done in advance means you're not fumbling around later on. All right, the fastener in here is a 6mm Allen. It's an M8 bolt. Fish that up inside there. Go ahead and remove it all the way, actually, the first one. A little bit of oil is still going to come out. Okay, in regards to this particular bolt, you want to make sure that you have a good sharp Allen wrench because it's a very shallow head on there and it's pretty easy to round it out. It's a special bolt that needs to have the low profile clearance for the axle. Also, you can see here that this has been sealed with a aluminum crush ring, which is fine, but it's just completely mashed. I kind of prefer the copper, solid copper crush rings in this particular application. All right, so now that those bolts are both out, you see how it still holds together because of the fork seals and everything that's going on here. But I can go ahead and remove these bolts now. And the whole assembly comes apart. If I just lift this boot up, the fork brace will come out. Like so. Take that off. These can come off. There we go. We're going to be replacing the fork seals for sure on this. Haven't made a determination on the forks yet. We'll get to that in a second. I need to get these clean before they go on, of course, but the first thing I'm going to do is actually remove the fork seals prior to cleaning. We'll put the fork seals in like later on when we go to reassemble. A tool like this works very well. You could just kind of hook in, being very careful not to go in too far so that you score the inside edge, and then just pry the seal out. It's best done when the fork is in a vise, which is what I'm going to do before I pull these out. Okay, so with the seals out, these things are fairly well stripped down. I'm going to go clean all the grime off of them and probably have them powder coated. I think they would look kind of a little cooler in black, just like the later model bikes were, but I'm not 100% sure. But I know for one thing I know for sure is that they need to be cleaned. And so we're going to get back to the assembly of these on a future video. Okay, well, I'm thinking this is a pretty good stopping point for today because we made quite a lot of progress. We got the whole fairing off of there and the front wheel off and down to just now the fork tubes. But the inspection of the fork tubes, replacement of the steering head bearings is like going to have to be in the next video, which is exactly what it's going to be. And we'll be continuing that very soon. And we thank you very much for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe and check out the reference products and ideas in the text below. And if you have any questions, contact us. Leave comments in the comment section of the video, and we'll do the best we can to get back to you as soon as possible. Well, thanks for your enthusiasm and look forward to the next episode from Boxer 2 Valve.